Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. It's great to be back with you. I hope you had an absolutely fantastic weekend. Hey, do not forget, July the 11th through the 13th, Ardmore, Oklahoma, Ardmore Convention Center, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend. Our theme is How We Know We Are Not Living in the Last Days. Great theme. I have spoken to each one of the speakers, and I've urged them. I want the lessons to be as basic as possible. I want each one of the speakers to address the fundamental things. You know, we're told constantly, all the time, we're in the last days. This is it. But this seminar will demonstrate to you very powerfully, very convincingly, we are not in the last days. Now, second point, do not forget, hey, we're running out of time here in March 2009 for you to take advantage of my very special two-book special. The Last Days Identified, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend 2019, and Into All the World, Then Comes the End. One of the fundamental promises of Jesus was the gospel had to be preached into all the world before the end of the age that the disciples asked about would come. Did you know that every single word that Jesus used to command or to predict the fulfillment of the Great Commission, Paul used those very same words to say it had been done? Did you realize that? I documented in this book. Now, if you ordered both of these books separately, it would cost you almost $35. But for this month, you know, here we are, the 18th, and for the rest of March 2019, very special, two-book special, total price, delivered to your door, $25. You can't beat that. So go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and up on the right-hand top, you'll see a banner there of the two-book special. Just click it, and you march right through it. I appreciate it so very much. And thank you so very much for the excellent response, by the way, to this very special two-book offer. All right. Well, I spent a good bit of time sharing with you how important it is to understand the disciples' questions in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and verse 3. Jesus predicted the destruction, desolation of Jerusalem and the temple. The disciples responded by saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Now, obviously, contextually, the disciples linked Christ's parousia not with his ascension, but with the destruction of the temple. They linked the end of the age, not with the cross, not with his death, but to the destruction of the temple. So many different attempts have been made to try to explain away the connection between the disciples' understanding of what Jesus predicted. Jesus was not predicting his death, burial, and resurrection. Do you not see all of these things? The time is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. That was not about his ascension. That was not about his resurrection. It was about the fall of Jerusalem and the temple. In response to that prediction, the disciples immediately asked, when shall these things, well, what things? Destruction of the temple. When shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So this morning what we need to do is to kind of summarize what we have seen and how important it is to examine the disciples' questions. I've shared with you that about 99.9% of the commentators believe the disciples were simply confused or mistaken to link the fall of Jerusalem and the temple with Christ's coming and the end of the age. I've shared with you that when Jesus predicted the end of the age and his coming in Matthew chapter 13, and tied it with the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12, and in Daniel chapter 12, the end or the shattering of the power of the holy people was when the resurrection and the end of the age would take place. So here is Jesus citing Daniel and applying it to the time of his coming and the end of the age. He asked the disciples, "Do you understand?" And they said, "Yes." Now, it's stunning, absolutely stunning, that on Facebook just recently, one respondent said, "Well, Preston, you're just absolutely crazy. The disciples were clearly confused." Really? Then they lied to Jesus in Matthew chapter 13. Secondly, I've shared with you that while there are many occasions in the ministry of Jesus in which the disciples clearly did understand, but the only way that we know that they did was because the text tells us they misunderstood, or because Jesus castigated them for their ignorance, for their misunderstanding. I challenged this correspondent on Facebook just recently to show one single word from the Olivet Discourse where Jesus said, "Guys, look, my coming in the end of the age will not happen at the time of the fall of Jerusalem. You guys just don't understand, do you?" No, we have nothing even closely resembling that. And thus, when people insist that the disciples were mistaken or confused, we have their own utter rejection of that concept, because when Jesus asked them if they understood, they said yes. And secondly, we have the fact that there's not one word in Matthew chapter 24 or the entirety of the Olivet Discourse that suggests that they were, in fact, confused. I have shared with you how the concept of the parousia, the presence of the Lord, is an Old Testament concept. That when God used one nation to judge another nation, that was His presence. I've shared with you how even Josephus, a first century contemporary of Paul the Apostle, of the writers of the New Testament, used the word parousia to speak of those non-physical comings of the Lord, in which Yahweh, through His sovereignty, would use one nation to judge another nation. That was the database of the disciples. That's what they understood by parousia. And I've shown you that the Christian age, which the commentators tell us is what the disciples were actually asking about. Okay? So here are the disciples. Jesus predicts the destruction of the Old Covenant temple. And the disciples, again, ostensibly confused, thought about the end of time. They thought about the end of the Christian age. Folks, that makes no sense whatsoever. By the way, let me read a quote to you. I think this is worth noting. N.T. Wright, considered one of the top scholars of the day, that doesn't make him infallible or inspired, but N.T. Wright has this to say, quote, "We can safely say that Jesus did not expect the world to come to an end. That bizarre idea, which has been touted around the learned halls of New Testament scholarship all this century, should now be given a pauper's funeral." Unquote. You see, many scholars recognize that the Jews did not believe in the end of the time-space continuum. But here's the question. What age did the Old Covenant temple represent? Old Covenant temple? It didn't represent the Christian age. It is therefore specious, it is therefore wrong to say that the disciples were asking about the end of the Christian age, which, final point, the Christian age, as I have shared with you over and over and over again, the current age, the Christian age, has no end. Now, folks, listen to me very carefully, because you got to catch the power of this. When somebody jumps up today and they talk about the resurrection being on the last day, well, the last day of what? Well, if it's the last day, it must be the last day of time. That's illogical. If the Christian age, the age in which you and I are now living, has no end, then the resurrection, the parousia, the judgment that was to occur on the last day must have occurred on the last days of a different age. The Old Covenant age, which is exactly precisely where Daniel chapter 12 puts it. Daniel chapter 12 verse 2, resurrection. Angels ask, when shall this be? The answer, heaven's answer was, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things shall be fulfilled. See how easy that is? There's a whole lot more that we could share in our summary, but beginning tomorrow, we're going to focus on this really distinctive term that the disciples used when they talked about end of the age. The Suntulia to Aeonion. Probably didn't pronounce that correctly. Okay? This is directly related to what we've seen, but we need to dig deeper into this term, the specific term, to drive home the point. The disciples were not asking about the end of the Christian age. Don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.